On an ordinary Tuesday morning, Maria's rent payment leaves her bank account. $1,500 gone to the landlord, same as every month for the last decade. The roof stays over her head, and from the outside, nothing looks different. But this month, one thing has changed, and it changes everything. Maria didn't earn that rent by going to work. Her investments earned it while she slept. The money that paid for her home this month came from money, not from hours. And the moment that happened, the first time Maria's investments covered her rent all by themselves, a line got crossed that can never be uncrossed. She has officially stopped being someone who works for her. Today I'm going to show you why that single day changes everything, why it's a far bigger deal than hitting some big round number in your account, and exactly how close it might be for you. Let me explain why this specific milestone matters so much, because it's not the one people usually chase. Most people, when they dream about money, dream about a giant number. $1 million, 10 million, some finish line far off in the distance. But that number is abstract. It doesn't mean anything you can feel. This milestone is different because it's tied to something real and physical. The roof over your head, rent, or a mortgage is almost always a person's single biggest expense, the largest and most unavoidable bill they pay. It's the thing you work the first week or two of every month just to cover. So the day your investments can pay it for you is the day the single heaviest weight you carry gets lifted off your shoulders and placed onto something that never gets tired. Picture Maria carrying a massive boulder on her back. That's her rent, month after month, year after year. And then picture a machine sliding underneath it and taking the entire weight while she stands up straight for the first time in her adult life. That's what this day is. It's about the biggest burden you have transferring off of you and onto your money. So let me show you the machine that actually does this. Because once you see how it works, this stops feeling like a fantasy and starts feeling like a target. Picture your investments as a tree that you plant and grow over years. For a long time, you're the one watering it, feeding it, and it gives you nothing back. It just grows. But once that tree is big enough, it starts dropping fruit every single year, on its own, whether you show up or not. That fruit is the money your investments generate, the growth, the dividends, the returns. And here's the key. You get to eat the fruit without ever cutting down the tree. The tree stays. It keeps growing. It just also feeds you now. So the entire game of paying your rent with investments comes down to growing your tree big enough that the fruit it drops each year is bigger than your rent for the year. Picture a tree heavy with fruit, and underneath it a basket that represents your rent. And the magic moment is when the fruit falling from the tree overflows that basket, all on its own, forever. Now let me put real numbers on it, because the size of the tree you need is probably different from what you'd guess, and seeing it makes the whole thing concrete. A reasonable, sensible investment portfolio can generate somewhere around 4 to 5% of its value for you to live on each year, without shrinking the tree itself. So let's use a round number and say your tree drops about 5% of itself in fruit every year. Now take Maria's rent. $1,500 a month, which is $18,000 a year. The question becomes, how big does her tree have to be so that 5% of it equals $18,000? Picture the math laid out simply. And the answer is around $360,000 invested. Picture that number glowing on the screen. $360,000 in investments, and Maria's rent is handled for the rest of her life without her lifting a finger. Now picture her friend Danny, who pays $1,000 a month. His tree only needs to be around $240,000. And their coworker Priya, paying $2,000 a month, needs around $480,000. Picture 3 different sized trees standing in a row. One for Maria, one for Danny, one for Priya, each matched to a different rent. Whatever your specific number is, there is a specific size of tree that sets your housing free forever. And it is a real, reachable, countable number, not a vague fantasy. But here's where this gets interesting, and where the title really comes alive. Because paying your rent is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of an unstoppable chain reaction. And this is the part almost nobody thinks through. Picture the day Maria's tree finally covers her rent. From that day forward, every single dollar she used to spend on rent is suddenly free. That's a huge chunk of her income, the biggest chunk that no longer has anywhere it needs to go. So what does she do with it? She takes that freed up rent money and feeds it right back into the tree. Picture the $1,500 that used to flow out to her landlord now looping back around and pouring into the base of the tree instead. And because the tree is already big, that extra water makes it grow dramatically faster than it did before. Picture Maria's tree accelerating, growing visibly quicker now, because it's being fed by the very expense it just eliminated. Her rent stops being a cost and becomes fuel. This is the moment the whole system flips from crawling to sprinting. And it doesn't stop there, because now the tree starts knocking out her other expenses, one by one. Faster and faster. Picture a row of baskets underneath Maria's tree. The first one was rent, but the others are her other bills. Her groceries, her car, her utilities, her phone. Once the tree overflows the rent basket and she starts pouring that money back in, the tree grows fast enough to start overflowing into the next basket, and then the next. Picture the fruit spilling over from rent into groceries, into the car payment, into utilities, each basket filling up in turn, faster than the last, because each time she conquers an expense, that money becomes more fuel for the tree. Rent is the first domino, and it's the biggest and heaviest one, which is exactly why knocking it over sets off the chain that topples all the others. The day investments pay your rent isn't the finish line. It's the first domino falling in a chain that ends with your investments paying for your entire life. Now let me get into why this changes you as a person, not just your bank account, because the psychological shift is even bigger than the financial one. For your entire adult life, there's been a fear humming in the background, whether you've noticed it or not. The fear tied to that roof over your head. What if I lose my job? How do I make rent? What if I get sick or hurt or the company downsizes? How do I keep a roof over my head? Meet James, who feels that exact fear every single day. Picture it as a thin wire of tension running through every decision James makes, keeping him in a job he hates, keeping him from taking risks, keeping him compliant because he cannot afford to lose the income that pays for his home. Now picture the day James's investments finally cover his rent, and picture that wire going slack. Being fired stops being a catastrophe that could put him on the street because his home is already paid for by something no boss can take away. Picture James walking into work the day after his investments started paying his rent, standing a little taller, speaking a little more freely, because for the first time, they don't own him anymore. That is a different kind of human being, not richer in some abstract way, freer in a way you can feel in your chest. Let me show you exactly how much that freedom is worth, because it's more than most people realize. Picture two employees sitting in the same meeting, doing the same job. James, who we just met, and his coworker Tom. James needs the paycheck to make rent. And picture the invisible leash running from his neck to his boss's hand. He'll take the abuse, swallow the unfair treatment, work the extra weekend, because the roof depends on it. Tom has investments paying his rent, and picture that there's no leash on him at all. He does the job because he chooses to, he speaks up when something's wrong, and he can walk away any day and still have a home. Same job, same desk. But James is a captive and Tom is a free person who happens to be there voluntarily. That freedom transforms how you negotiate, how you're treated, the opportunities you're willing to chase, the risks you're willing to take. When your basic survival is handled by your investments, you make decisions from a position of power instead of a position of fear. And people who make decisions from power, like Tom, tend to end up far wealthier than people who make them from fear. Now let me be honest with you about the traps, because I don't want to sell you a fantasy, and there are a few things that can crack this if you're not careful. The first trap is inflation. The fact that rent tends to rise over the years. Picture Maria's rent basket slowly growing larger over time, needing more fruit to fill it than it did a decade ago. This is real, but here's the good news. A healthy tree grows its fruit over time too. Companies raise their prices and their payouts as the years pass. So a well-built portfolio tends to produce more each year, which is exactly what you need to keep pace with a rising basket. The key is to build the tree a little bigger than you strictly need on day one, so there's a cushion, and to keep it invested for growth rather than pulling out every last piece of fruit. Picture Maria's tree growing slightly faster than her basket, so it always stays ahead. The second trap is the temptation to cut down the tree. Picture a hard year for Danny. The market drops, his tree looks smaller, and there's a voice whispering that he should just sell a big branch, cash out a chunk to feel safe, or to buy something he wants. The entire system depends on one rule. You live off the fruit and you never touch the tree. The moment Danny starts hacking off branches, the tree drops less fruit next year, which tempts him to cut more, and he spirals down to a stump. Picture a fence around the tree in his mind with one rule painted on it. Fruit only, never the tree. Especially in the scary years when the temptation is strongest. The people who make this work are the ones who leave the trunk alone no matter what the market does. And the third trap is the most human one. Lifestyle inflation racing ahead of the tree. Picture Priya, whose investments finally grow big enough to cover her $2,000 rent, and who immediately celebrates by moving into a $4,000 apartment. Picture her basket doubling in size the instant her tree got big enough to fill the old one, so she's right back to square one, still working, still trapped, just in a nicer cage. The people who actually reach this milestone are the ones who keep their basket the same size while they grow the tree, who resist upgrading their entire life every time they get ahead. Keep the roof reasonable, let the tree catch up and pass it, and then, once you're truly free, you can decide what to upgrade from a position of total security instead of trading your freedom away for a bigger apartment. Let me show you this whole thing playing out in two lives, because the difference between the person who reaches this day and the person who doesn't is smaller than you'd think. Chris and Ryan are the same age, work the same job, earn the same salary, and both pay the same $1,500 rent. From the outside, identical, but they do one thing differently and it sends them to completely opposite places. Ryan does what feels normal. Picture every raise turning into a nicer lifestyle, his rent money always flowing out to the landlord and never coming back. No tree ever getting planted. Or a tiny one that keeps getting picked bare for vacations and gadgets. Picture Ryan at 50, still sending that rent payment out every single month, still working because he has to, the boulder still on his back, the leash still around his neck, no closer to freedom than he was at 25, just with nicer stuff. Ryan spent his entire working life renting his home from a landlord and renting his freedom from his employer, and he never owned either one. Chris planting the tree early and feeding it relentlessly, keeping his rent reasonable while his income climbs, and pouring every spare dollar into growing that tree. For years, it's slow and unglamorous. Picture a small tree that seems to do nothing while Ryan's life looks flashier and more fun. But then, somewhere in his 40s, picture Chris's tree finally growing heavy enough that the fruit overflows the rent basket, all on its own. And picture the chain reaction firing, the freed up rent money pouring back into the tree accelerating, the next basket filling, and the next. Picture Chris walking into his boss's office, calm and free, because his home no longer depends on that job. Same salary, same rent, same starting line. Ryan spent the money and stayed captive forever. Chris planted a tree, waited, and bought back his own freedom, starting with the single most important day of his financial life, the day his investments paid his rent. So let me bring this all the way home and tell you what to actually do with it. The reason this milestone is so powerful is that it turns a vague, impossible-sounding dream, become financially free, into a specific, countable, reachable target. You don't have to figure out how to make $1 million. You just have to answer one simple question, the same one Maria answered. How big does my tree need to be to cover my rent? Take your monthly rent, multiply it by 12 to get your yearly rent, and then multiply that by about 20. That number, rent times 12 times 20, is roughly the size of the tree that sets your housing free forever. When Maria ran it on her $1,500 rent, she got that $360,000 target, wrote it on a sticky note, and put it on her wall. That is no longer a fantasy. That is a goal with an actual finish line, and every dollar she invested was a step toward it. And here's the final shift I want you to make, the one that changes how you see every dollar starting today. Stop thinking of investing as locking money away in some boring account you'll see in 40 years. Start seeing every dollar you invest as a seed that's growing your tree toward that one specific magical day. The day the fruit finally overflows the rent basket and your home stops costing you your time. Because everything really does change on that day. The biggest weight you carry lifts off your back. The leash around your neck falls away. The chain reaction begins that will eventually pay for your whole life. And you stop being a person who trades their hours for a roof and become a person whose money keeps the roof up while they go live. That day is real. It has a number attached to it, and it is closer than you think. So find your number, plant your tree, and start growing it today. Because the most important rent payment you will ever make is the first one you don't have to make at all.